Ancient mysteries that were finally solved. The collapse of classic Mayan civilization. The ancient Maya civilization has some of the coolest lore when it comes to ancient history. Most notably because of their architecture, their mathematics, their astronomical system, and likely most famously, their calendar. In case you've been living under a rock, remember when in 2012 everybody thought the world was just gonna, end? That was because of the Mayan calendar, and that actually wasn't an end of the world prediction. It was actually more or less of a formatting error. Regardless, the Mayan civilization was an extremely advanced civilization that existed for thousands of years. And it's recorded that the Mayan civilization dates back as far as 2000 BC. Obviously, starting from humble beginnings, consisting of simple villages and early agricultural development. It took roughly 1200 years from 2000 BC to 750 BC for the Maya civilization to start seeing significant societal development, specifically with the development of large architectural projects and even writing. These early years in Mayan history are known as the pre-classic era. And I guess there's three primary time periods when speaking on Mayan history: pre-classic period, the classic period, and the post-classic period. And the collapse of Mayan civilization we're going to be talking about is specifically the collapse of the classic period, which is the one that was most mysterious and only recently understood fully. From roughly 2000 BC to 250 AD, the Mayan civilization was developed greatly, which leads us to the classical period of the Maya civilization. This classic period of Mayan civilization is typically categorized by construction and urbanism, and on top of the already established development in architecture, agriculture, and scripting, there was now also significant development in intellectual and artistic activities, which are some of the most famous and celebrated parts of Mayan culture still to this day. During this classic period from 250 AD to 900 AD, there was cities with populations as large as 120,000 people, and there was numerous cities spread across all of Maya with established trade networks connecting all of them. But this major development brings us to our first historical mystery. From the ancient times going back as far as 2000 BC to more early modern times in 900 AD, the Mayan civilization saw immense development in almost every aspect of society. They had trade, architecture, agriculture, literature, art. It seemed like the Mayan civilization only had progress. But then something interesting happened. During the 9th century, it seemed like almost out of nowhere, Mayan cities were just collapsing and being abandoned, leaving these prosperous and developed cities to essentially rot for a reason that no archaeologist could understand until now. For the longest time, archaeologists that dedicated their life to understand the Mayans could not pin a single answer to this question. What happened to classic Mayan civilization? There was no one ice age or asteroid or army or anything they could pin on this time frame to draw a reasonable conclusion to why such a developed and growing civilization would essentially just abandon their homeland. That was until 2012, when it was discovered that there was no one reason for the collapse of classic Maya. It was actually a combination of issues that caused an interconnected crisis, and it took experts from a plethora of different studies to kind of come to this conclusion, including archaeologists, scientists, and satellite imaging experts. But here's the conclusion that they eventually came to. One of the biggest factors that played a major role in these classic Mayan cities being abandoned was essentially a major political collapse. And even that collapse is multifaceted, because even that political instability was caused by a number of factors. So before we just blame everything on political instability, let's kind of look at the landscape of the time. Near the end of the classic Maya civilization, there was a lot going wrong. Specifically, deforestation, overpopulation, and drought, which all ultimately led to a massive lack of food. At this point in time, there was already a multi-decade-long drought going on in the area. Little to no rain, streams drying up, and soil fertility was at an all-time low. Coupling this with environmental stress from the deforestation, paired with also an exponentially growing population at the time, meant that things were only destined to fail. And because of this, the thriving, developed city that was sustaining all of this life and growth was now crumbling beneath its feet because it couldn't sustain all of these people. But on top of people just being too crowded and too hungry, the current system of government almost had no capabilities of solving this issue at all. Specifically because the classic Mayan civilization was based on the ritual authority of the ruler, which means the Mayan ruler was only able to control things like construction, warfare, and ritual. Essentially things that only related to the Mayan tradition. But things like agriculture, food trade, and food distribution were completely out of the ruler's hands, meaning that there was no real system of power in place that could help end these ongoing issues that were at this point exponential. And because of the ongoing drought, the exponential growth of the population, and the lack of agricultural support, people had no other chance than to abandon these cities that they were living in, and most people ended up heading northward, abandoning this classic Mayan civilization that they had spent, at this point, thousands of years building. And while this 2012 conclusion kind of solves the mystery of what happened to classic Maya, the story of the Mayan civilization doesn't end there, because Mayan history didn't die out with classic Maya. There is still a post-classic period that went on, although it's an unfortunate one. This political instability that was experienced in classic Maya kind of echoed through post-classic Maya, and this continued instability didn't allow the Mayan find people to settle as quickly and rebuild as they would have in previous times. But the major nail in the coffin, which was no mystery, was what happened at the very end of all Mayan civilization, which happened in the mid-1500s, and can be summarized in 2 words: Spanish conquests. The post-classic Mayan civilization was simply no match for the germs, steel, and armies that the Spanish had at the time. And while the Mayan civilization obviously no longer exists today, their descendants definitely do. And globally, there's over 6 million people that are still speaking the 28 different Mayan languages. Most of these people living in similar areas to where their ancestors did, which is pretty cool that their culture is able to live on. But yeah, archaeologists were stumped why Mayan civilization seemingly had a random exodus during the 9th century, and it took all the way up until 2012 for the solution to be unveiled: self-healing Roman concrete. At this point, I really don't think I need to explain why the Roman Empire was so impressive. The feats and lore of ancient Rome and the Roman Empire are just so cool. And we've talked about a lot of this history on this channel. Actually, my second video ever on this channel was about why Rome even fell in the first place. But that brings us to our next mystery. As I'm hoping most of you know, Rome fell a very long time ago. Although in the modern day, we still have a lot of architecture from ancient Rome and the Roman Empire. And this has puzzled archaeologists for centuries. And it's a reasonable question. How did the Romans have such effective, long-lasting structures made out of concrete that didn't have rebar, and they didn't have any of the modern math or tools or tricks that we have today with our modern concrete structures? There's a saying that goes, modern times require modern solutions, but I think there should also be a saying, ancient times require ancient solutions. And the ancient solutions that the Romans used for their concrete was genius. And it's definitely not an accident that so many Roman ruins are still in remarkable condition to this very day. In January of 2023, not even 3 years ago, a group of scientists from MIT and Harvard were doing a deep dive into Roman concrete when they finally came to the conclusion of the Romans' concrete success. And it's actually rather interesting. But let's take a step back. Before this discovery in MIT in 2023, all of the building blocks of Roman concrete were known. We knew that the Romans used volcanic rock, volcanic ash, seawater, and a little bit of slacked lime, essentially a limestone water mixture. But here's the caveat. Prior to this discovery in 2023, the going belief was that this slacked lime and limestone was not an actual important component in this concrete construction. It was more or less of a byproduct of poor patchwork and didn't actually belong to make the concrete better. It was just kind of there by mistake or due to low quality materials. But the irony is that this is actually the complete opposite of the truth. This limestone and slack lime in this Roman concrete was the exact reason for its longevity over thousands of years. You see, the limestone wasn't there for looks or because it was cheap to add into concrete. The Romans knew that limestone would react with water in a way that would be beneficial for the concrete's longevity. Essentially, what the Romans would do was they would create a concrete mixture, ensuring that pieces of limestone and slack lime were inside of the concrete made from this volcanic ash and seawater. And as this concrete was being processed and cured, there would essentially be small pockets of slack lime and limestone throughout all of the cement. Just imagine mint chocolate chip ice cream. The concrete is the mint ice cream, and then the chocolate chips are all the little bits of slack lime and limestone. And I apologize for not giving a trigger warning for mint chip ice cream. I know it's a very controversial ice cream, but I'm just gonna say it. I like it. Back to the mystery though, although this limestone didn't necessarily serve a huge purpose when the concrete was fresh and intact, as the concrete would begin to settle and shift and crack over time, this would expose the chunks of slack lime and limestone. And this is exactly where the magic happens. As these bits of slack lime and limestone would be exposed, water would begin to enter these cracks, and the reaction between the limestone and the water would cause a chemical reaction that would essentially begin to self-heal the concrete. And this seemingly rudimentary solution was actually the cornerstone of Roman concrete success, and the solution to a mystery that went on for decades. Strange Peruvian holes. Imagine you're an archaeologist in the early 1900s walking through rural Peru. It's hot, sunny, and you're getting pretty miserable when you notice a strange structure in the ground. It's a spirally, rocky thing, and you have no idea what it is. You take note of it, but keep moving, because it honestly could be anything. When eventually you notice another one, and then another one. You notice at this point so many throughout the day that you just can no longer ignore it, and you make a note of it. You bring it back to your archaeological buddies, but nobody has an answer. Nobody's seen these before, and they're not quite sure what these are or what their purpose was. These strange structures in the deserts of southern Peru likely had a purpose, but what was that purpose? The ancient Nazca people lived here, but were they advanced enough to build anything like this? And if they were building these things, what were they building them for? You ditch your friends and go to a library to try to find any archaeological archives of these structures existing, and there's really nothing you can find. You've been able to read historical accounts confirming that other people have seen these in the past, although any historical data is scarce, and there's absolutely no answer about them, only an acknowledgement acknowledgement of their existence. So at this point, you're stumped. And with this discovery, you set out on a journey for answers. But what you end up starting is a massive conspiracy theory on what these things could be. Decades after you first saw these in the early 1900s, theories are becoming more and more widespread as other archaeologists have began to study the Nazca area of Peru. At this point, it was believed that the Nazca people had pre-Columbian origins in this region with a culture that likely flourished from 100 BC to 800 AD. But it was also believed that these structures were similar to Spanish mines and subterranean canals. And so by some, it was initially believed that these structures were potentially Spanish, although that theory was soon to be proven very wrong. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, a group of Italian researchers and archaeologists decided to study the Nazca area of Peru using satellite imaging, something that at that point hadn't been done yet for this purpose. And what they found was amazing. What they discovered was that this system of structures was much more extensive than they initially thought. And they even saw that these structures were present in nearby settlements, which were dated and identified separately from this discovery. Further investigation showed that there is even structures in the Nazca drainage basin, which ultimately gave a lot more context to what these structures could have been. And it was ultimately concluded that these mysterious seeming structures were a subterranean irrigation system, or simply put, an underground well basically, to transfer water between settlements and areas in this vast desert. And with this discovery, it was ruled that no, the Spanish didn't build these. And while the Spanish could have very easily leveraged them while they were in the area, these specific structures were pre-Hispanic. And in 2017, the general consensus was that these structures were built as far back as 500 AD. And the combination of all of these discoveries definitely made some archaeologists reconsider how advanced they believed the Nazca people to be. The 4,000-year-old comb. In 2016, a group of archaeologists were in the ruins of Lachish, an ancient Canaanite city-state which is located in modern-day Israel. During this dig, they found a very interesting artifact that ended up being a very significant discovery for ancient language. During this dig, one of the archaeologists found an ivory comb. It doesn't really sound super exciting until you understand that this ivory comb was literally 3,700 years old. This ivory comb was made out of elephant ivory. And while this discovery in this artifact is amazing, it doesn't end there. On this small comb, there was a very faint and small sentence written. But what was interesting was, even though this artifact was extremely old, nearly 4,000 years old, the sentence that was written used the phonetic alphabet, which was extremely uncommon for this time. Typically during this time frame, hieroglyphs or other forms of script were what people used. So finding the phonetic alphabet was very interesting. But while this ancient artifact was cool, the mystery still stood. What did this say? And this mystery was actually relatively short-lived, as after it was found in 2016, the code was deciphered in 2021. And what was engraved on the comb goes as follows: "May this tusk root out the lice of the hair and the beard." And I guess this was more or less of a blessing of your hair, or maybe a threat against potential lice living in your hair. Regardless, it's so cool that they were actually able to translate what was on this 4,000-year-old artifact. And historians believe that this artifact likely came from Egypt, because the region in which this artifact was found had no elephants anywhere nearby. And it was believed that this artifact was owned by a wealthy trader who was able to get luxury goods from other parts of the world. And who knows, maybe even just getting lice out of your hair during this time period was a luxury. So if I was one of the archaeologists on this dig, assuming that the structural integrity was solid on this comb, I would definitely run it through my hair, just to say I did it. And yes, I have hair. The mystery of the Ryukyu Islands. The Ryukyu Islands are a chain of small, isolated islands in the western Pacific Ocean off the coast of Japan and east of China. In the modern day, these islands are part of the Okinawa prefecture in Japan, but that wasn't always the case. In the history of people on these islands actually go as far back as 35,000 years ago. But this is where the mystery comes into play. When human remains were first discovered on these islands and they were dated all the way back to the Paleolithic period, people were astonished to see any human life on this island. And because of that, the initial theory was that these people must have gotten here by accident, and that there was simply no way that people would intentionally sail so far to these remote islands, hundreds of kilometers away from any other major civilization. But that begs the question, if people never got to this island intentionally and only got here by accident, how did they get here by accident? And it was that exact question that a group of US-based researchers planned to answer. This study went on for a long time too. From 1989 all the way up until 2017, these organizations dropped 138 buoys from the eastern coast of Taiwan, as well as the northern tip of the Philippines, Philippines. And they picked both of these two locations specifically because they were part of the Kuroshio Current, the world's fastest ocean current that literally almost hasn't changed in the last 100,000 years, so the data should be relatively consistent. And what they found after dropping all of these buoys from both of these locations, out of 138 of these buoys, none of them floated to these islands, and only 4 of them floated within a 20-kilometer radius of any of the islands, basically blowing up the theory that the humans that were on this island got there by accident, and further validated the theory that prehistoric humans set sail intentionally to find these islands and intentionally inhabited them. And it's just interesting because 35,000 years ago, these prehistoric humans were getting on boats and floating to undiscovered islands. And while this doesn't necessarily confirm that this is exactly what happened, researchers that were part of the project did say, quote, "It was more likely that the early seafarers had more carefully plotted their courses than had been assumed," which I think is a nice way of saying we underestimated these fuzzballs. But at least it does shine light on how these people even got to this island in the first place. Ancient perfume. Here's the deal. We live very differently from our ancient ancestors, but we actually kind of share a lot of similar traits and even in some cases luxuries. And one example of that is perfume. Nowadays, it never hurts to put on a little Dior Sauvage, or maybe if you're in middle school, a little Axe body spray to, get the pheromones going. But this seemingly modern activity is actually nothing of the sort. And our ancient ancestors were no stranger to putting on a little stank for the ladies. Or the guys. Let me explain. For a very long time, it was known and understood that our ancient ancestors used perfume. There was writings, there was evidence, they knew that this was a luxury item that the rich enjoyed. But up until a certain point, there was never any evidence of it around. And there was very little hope that we would be able to ever smell ancient perfume. That was until a jar of Roman perfume was found in a Spanish villa, in an ancient burial site where Roman settlers once lived. This perfume that was found was contained in a quartz bottle, which alone was considered to be a luxury item of the time. But it doesn't end there. This quartz bottle was hidden in a dark and dry place, and it was also tightly sealed in a tar-like substance that was later revealed to be bitumen. And because of the nearly perfect conditions that this perfume was kept in, the internal contents were preserved. And this was a massive discovery into what the Romans liked to smell like. Previous to this discovery, it was pretty well known that the Romans would use olive oil and other oils and animal fats as a base of their perfumes and colognes, and obviously that they used colognes and perfumes. But with this discovery, researchers were actually able to smell for the first time ever what Roman perfume would have smelled like. Laboratory analyses of the bottle revealed that the primary scent, at least in this bottle of perfume, was patchouli. And this was kind of an amazing discovery because patchouli is a tropical plant from Southeast Asia and was likely brought to Rome through trade networks. Now, I want to reiterate that the scientists didn't just pop off the cap and smell it and, oh wow, it smells like patchouli, this smells so good. No, the internal contents were preserved but not necessarily fresh. And it took a chemical analysis to even be able to identify the patchouli's chemical signature in the mush that was in this quartz flask. But it was obviously enough to give us a very interesting insight into what the Romans used for the perfume. And it solved a pretty cool mystery that we didn't even know we wanted the answer to. Roman coins found in Japan. We've already talked about ancient Rome in this video, and we're talking about them again, because when we're talking about cool ancient history and ancient mysteries, they're worth bringing up. Now, one ancient mystery about the Roman Empire was exactly how far were their trade routes established. For example, it was known that the Roman Empire and the Han Dynasty in China knew of each other's existences, but it was kind of believed that they had no formal relationship, and their only understanding of each other kind of came through the established trade route that was basically spread across all of Eurasia, which was the very famous Silk Road. Both the Han Dynasty and the Roman Empire profited greatly from this trade route, but it still begs the question, how strong was the influence of the Roman Empire in Asia, specifically when it came to trade? And also, how far beyond the Han Dynasty did their trade go? And this mystery brings us to Japan in 2016, when a group of archaeologists were doing a dig and they found some weird little pebbles. But these weren't pebbles, these were ancient Roman coins from the 3rd and 4th century AD. These coins had Constantine the Great on them. And this discovery kind of made the mystery even bigger, because now the obvious question was, how did these coins get here? Who had these ancient Roman coins and what were they doing in Japan? Were they trading? Were they stolen? Were they a gift? Who knows? But what archaeologists were able to kind of draw from this discovery was that the ancient Romans' trade influence had roots much deeper in Asia than they initially thought. And to think that this trade route went as far as the Japanese island is pretty cool. Could you imagine being one of the archaeologists on this dig? You find it, you're very well versed in ancient Roman history, and you're like, oh my god, this is a Constantine coin, I know this. And then you go to your friends, you're like, guys, I found an artifact. You're like, oh, what'd you find? I'm like, I found ancient Roman coins. They're like, where'd you find it? And then you have to go, Japan. name, and then instantly everybody you're speaking to thinks that you are the dumbest person alive, only for you to then be proved as a legend for finding such a cool artifact in such a unique place. Like, imagine if your friend just went on a trip to Italy and he's like, dude, I went on an excursion and I did an archaeological dig and I found this cool ancient samurai sword. I'm sure your first thought to your friend would be, oh man, bless my friend's heart. He thought a Roman sword was a samurai sword. But then he FaceTimes you only to show you that no, he literally found a Japanese samurai sword in, you know, the Roman Empire. That's only how I can imagine this kind of conversation went. Because I definitely would assume that most archaeologists wouldn't assume that they're finding ancient Roman coins when doing a dig in Okinawa, Japan. The Tully monster. The year is 1958, and you are an archaeologist working in the Mazon Creek fossil beds when you have just found a very interesting fossil. This fossil isn't like anything you've seen before, and it kind of looks like fossilized poo, an ancient toy, some sort of large peanut. Whatever it was, you have never seen this before, and neither have any of your archaeological or scientific friends. Not only have they not seen this before, everybody was baffled and confused on what this fossil could be. And from the year 1958 until 2016, the origins of this 6-inch long, large wood-looking, bug-looking thing had no explanation. All anybody knew was that there was a hard outer shell, 2 eyes, 2 long stalks that protruded out of the head, but beyond that, everything was up for debate. But one of the hottest debates was whether this creature was a vertebrate or an invertebrate. But that debate was closed in 2016. And I just have to say, man, 2016 was such a good year for discoveries, because I feel like so many things we've discussed on this list have been from 2016. So shout out 2016. Honestly, just a good year all around. I was in high school at the time, just carefree, you know, just having fun. I'm not one of those people that said high school was way more fun. I have a lot more fun now, I think. But high school, there's a certain charm to it. You know, you have no responsibility in life. We're off topic. In 2016, after nearly 50 years of studying this thing, it was confirmed that this wooden-looking bug was confirmed to be a 307 million year old invertebrate creature. It was labeled as a jawless fish, and it had many similarities to the lamprey. Not everything is known about this creature, obviously, and work is still being done on the fossil, but the major points of contention are, you know, case closed now. And this is an invertebrate creature that is literally 307 million years old. So crazy. Also, I find it kind of funny that the scientific name for the Tully monster is the Tully monstrum. Like, okay, you can put it in a suit. We all see through that. But in case I haven't shown any images of what artists think the Tully monstrum looked like back in the day, here are some images and renders. And I think that these look a lot better than the poo-looking fossil that was originally found. Oh, and I guess kind of a wholesome note, this creature is literally called the Tully monster because it was found by a man named Frank Tully. Look at this guy, legend. And speaking of legends, you're a legend if you're still watching this video. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I would consider it, because obviously you liked this video, and I'll let you in a little secret. We post every single Friday. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, we've covered a lot of ancient mysteries, from Roman concrete to Roman perfume to ivory combs to ancient bug monsters that look like poo. If you like this video, check out the video on screen right now. It's a video I made about small mistakes that ended up changing history forever. And if you liked this video, you're gonna love that one. Thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, trust me, bro.